She slid a legal notice across my kitchen table and said, "You've got 30 days to respond." My own daughter had filed against me. I wasn't supposed to see the court papers until I saw my name listed as the defendant. The envelope looked like junk mail until I saw my daughter's signature under petitioner. "You need to sign this before your hearing," she said, like I already knew what she'd done. I thought it was a mistake until the clerk confirmed my daughter had already filed the case. There was a notice taped to my door, and it wasn't from a stranger. "I tried to handle this privately," she said, then handed me a filed petition. I had 2 weeks to respond in court, and I didn't even know what I was being accused of yet. The moment I read the word guardianship, I realized this wasn't about money. "You have 21 days to respond," she said, sliding the stamped court papers across my kitchen table like it was a bill I'd forgotten to pay. And I remember staring at the case number because it didn't feel real seeing my name printed next to the word respondent. The paper smelled faintly of ink and something official, and my daughter didn't sit down, just stood there with her arms folded, watching me read like she'd already seen every reaction I might have. I flipped to the first page too quickly, my fingers catching on the corner, and that's when I saw her name under petitioner, clean and deliberate. No hesitation in the signature, no sign this had been hard for her. "You filed this?" I asked, but my voice came out lower than I expected, like the room had swallowed the sound before it reached her. She nodded once, not defensive, not angry, just certain, and that certainty made my chest tighten more than anything written on the page. I skimmed the headings, petition, assets, capacity, and paused at that last word because it didn't belong to me, not like that, not in a legal document that treated it like a question already halfway answered. "This isn't what you think," she said, which would have made sense if I knew what I was supposed to be thinking, but the way she said it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced keeping her voice steady. I looked back down and noticed the date filed was 3 days ago, which meant this had already been moving before she ever walked into my house, before she ever gave me a chance to ask why. The clock above the stove ticked louder than usual, each second stretching out as I scanned the lines about financial accounts and property, details that were accurate enough to make my stomach turn, because I hadn't shared any of this with her recently. "Where did you get this information?" I asked, and she hesitated just long enough for me to notice, her eyes flicking toward her bag before settling back on me like it didn't matter. "You've been meaning to organize things," she said, sidestepping the question, and something about the phrasing made it sound like I'd missed a step everyone else had already agreed on. I flipped another page and saw a section flagged with a small tab, and when I pulled it open, there was a reference to a physician's statement, not attached, just noted, like it was coming next, like this wasn't complete yet. "What doctor?" I asked, sharper now, and she pressed her lips together for a second before answering. "It's just part of the process," which wasn't an answer at all. I set the papers down carefully, my hands suddenly unsteady, and noticed for the first time a second envelope sitting near her elbow, thicker, already opened. And when I looked up at her, she was watching me in that same quiet way, like she was waiting for me to ask about it, like whatever was inside mattered just as much as what I'd already seen. And I realized with a slow, creeping dread that this wasn't the whole filing. It was just the part she decided I was ready to read. I opened the document expecting a typo, but every page said the same thing. She was trying to take control of everything. I didn't ask right away. I just reached for the second envelope, and the way her fingers tightened on it for half a second before letting go told me whatever was inside mattered more than everything I'd already read. The paper inside was thicker, clipped neatly, and the first thing I saw wasn't legal language this time, but a letterhead from a clinic I didn't recognize. My name typed below it like I'd been there recently, like I'd said things I couldn't remember saying. "What is this?" I asked, but she was already watching me too closely, like she was measuring how long it would take for me to understand. I scanned the page and felt my stomach drop at the phrases. Evaluation recommended, cognitive concerns, follow-up pending. And none of it made sense because I hadn't agreed to any evaluation, hadn't even spoken to anyone about something like that. "You told me you had an appointment last month," she said quietly, and I shook my head immediately, too fast, because I would have remembered something like that. I had to remember something like that. But then a flicker of doubt slipped in, small and sharp, because there had been a day I'd rescheduled something, a call I'd cut short, and suddenly I wasn't as certain as I wanted to be. "This isn't proof," I said, pushing the paper back toward her, but she didn't take it, just let it sit there between us like it didn't need defending. "It's enough to ask questions," she replied, and that word, questions, landed heavier than anything else because it meant this wasn't finished, it was just getting started. I grabbed my phone without thinking and pulled up my calendar, scrolling back through the past few weeks, my thumb hesitating when I saw an entry I didn't recognize right away. Something labeled consult with no details attached. "You added that?" I asked, looking up at her, and she shook her head, slow, deliberate, like she'd expected me to find it eventually. My chest tightened as I opened my email next, searching for confirmations, and there it was. A message I didn't remember reading from that same clinic, time-stamped late at night, confirming an appointment I couldn't picture attending. "You're missing things," she said, softer now, and that softness made it worse because it sounded like concern, like she believed this version of events more than I did. I stood up too quickly, my chair scraping loud against the floor, and walked to the counter where I kept my bag, digging through it until my fingers found my notebook, flipping it open to the last few pages, scanning for anything that might prove I hadn't imagined my own routine. Most of it was there, groceries, calls, reminders, but there was a gap, 2 blank days where I knew I'd been busy, where I should have written something down. "This doesn't mean anything," I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing even to me, and when I turned back toward her, she was already reaching into her bag again, pulling out her phone this time. "Then explain this," she said, tapping the screen before turning it toward me, and I felt my breath catch as I saw a security alert. My bank, my account. Flagging a login from a device I didn't recognize, time-stamped the same night as that email, and for a second I couldn't tell what scared me more. That someone else might have accessed it, or that I couldn't be completely sure it wasn't me. I stared at the timestamp on that alert a second too long, trying to force it to make sense, but my daughter stepped closer before I could say anything, her voice low and steady like she'd already rehearsed this moment. That's not the only one, she said, reaching over and swiping to the next screenshot, and then another, each one showing the same thing. Late-night logins, unfamiliar devices, activity I couldn't place. And I felt something inside me start to slip, not all at once, just enough to make me question the edges of my own memory. "You're building a case," I said, but it came out quieter than I meant, like I wasn't sure if saying it out loud would make it more real. She didn't deny it this time, just held my gaze and said, "I'm trying to protect what's left before it gets worse." And that word, left, hit harder than anything else because it assumed something was already gone. I shook my head, backing away a step, but my heel caught the leg of the chair and I had to grab the counter to steady myself, the room suddenly feeling smaller, tighter, like there wasn't enough air. "You think I'm doing this to myself?" I asked, and she hesitated again, just for a second, but this time I saw something underneath it, something closer to fear than certainty. "I think someone is," she said carefully, "and I don't think you'd remember if they were." The words landed wrong, not because they didn't make sense, but because a part of me recognized the possibility before I could push it away, and my eyes went back to the phone in my hand, to those timestamps lining up too cleanly with the gaps I'd just found. "Then who?" I asked, sharper now, because if she was right, that meant this wasn't just about me anymore. She didn't answer right away, just looked past me toward the hallway, and something in that glance made my chest tighten again, slower this time, heavier. "Mom," she said, quieter now, "when was the last time you changed your passwords?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out because I didn't know, not exactly, not clearly, and the silence stretched long enough for her to step around me, moving toward the small desk near the window where I kept my laptop. "Don't," I said, but it came too late, because she was already opening it, already typing, her fingers moving with a familiarity that made my stomach drop before the screen even lit up. "You saved them," she said, almost to herself, and then she turned the screen toward me, and I felt the ground shift under me in a way that had nothing to do with memory. There, in the browser history, were logins I didn't recognize, but the device name attached to them wasn't a stranger's, wasn't unknown or hidden. It was labeled with her name, the same one listed on those court papers, the same one signed at the bottom of that petition. I looked up at her slowly, my throat tightening as the pieces finally locked into place, and for the first time since she walked in, she didn't look calm. "You said I wouldn't remember," I whispered, and her eyes flickered just enough to confirm what I already knew. "I said you might not," she replied, but it wasn't careful anymore, it was defensive, and that shift broke whatever hesitation I had left. "You did this," I said, the words coming out steadier than I felt, and she shook her head immediately, too fast, like she'd been waiting to deny it. "I did what I had to," she shot back, and there it was, not confusion, not concern, but justification, like the outcome mattered more than how she got there. My hands started to shake, but not from doubt this time, from something colder, sharper, as I stepped closer to the table and picked up the papers again, flipping straight to that section on capacity, on control, on everything she was trying to take. "You needed proof," I said, piecing it together out loud now, each word landing heavier than the last. "So you made it." She didn't answer, didn't even try this time, and that silence said more than anything else could have. I looked at her, really looked, and all I could see was someone who had already decided the end justified whatever she'd done to get there. Someone who believed this version of me enough to make it real on paper, in court, in records that wouldn't question how they were created. The clock kept ticking behind us, steady and indifferent, and I realized with a kind of quiet, hollow clarity that even if I proved the truth, even if I tore all of this apart piece by piece, there would always be a version of me now that existed in those documents. Confused, unreliable, incapable, and she had put it there herself. I don't know what scared me more in that moment, that my daughter was willing to do this, or that part of her still believed she was right.